Okay, good morning. We are on Mem Vav Amud Aleph 46a. We're in the middle of a mind bender, using our God-given mind to understand God's given Torah. With that little rhyme. Okay, so what do we have?
Mem Vav Aleph.
Mem Vav Aleph 46a. So we have it like this. We've come to the point where we have a GEZEIRA SHAVA. Well, we have two things in the docket. We have a KAL and we have a GEZEIRA SHAVA. The GEZEIRA SHAVA is much more powerful, we're discovering, than the KAL.
Is that generally speaking, or just in this case?
I believe it's generally speaking, but certainly it's being buried out here. But again, I'm not. I would have to know all of the Gemara to be able to make a statement across the board like that. But let's just keep in the context of this page, because I don't know enough. If I don't have all of the Gemara at my fingertips to be able to say across the board, that's the way it is. Okay, so the KAL is. It's important to remember this, even though we rejected it. The KAL is that Eglah Roof on the one hand is disqualified based on age. That's its stringency. Right? And yet, we have no statement made with regard to blemish. Right? And therefore, we wanted to derive from paraduma, which has no restriction on age, and therefore more lenient, and yet has that contingency that blemish disqualifies. That was the KAL, which you prevented by the word ba, because when it describes the disqualification of a paraduma because of a blemish, the verse says, no blemish in it. Yeah. Now we have, so that's going from paraduma to Eglah Rufa, in that we're prevented from transferring the disqualification of blemish from paraduma to Eglah Rufa. We are prevented from making that transfer.
Right.
Taking the disqualification of blemish from paraduma and applying it to Eglah Rufa. We're prevented from doing that because the Torah says the word ba in it with regard to the blemish of Eglah Rufa, of paraduma. Right? That's one direction. The other direction is from Eglah Rufa toward paraduma. Namely, when it comes to the disqualification of work being done with that animal. When it comes to paraduma, the only thing the verse says is, upon which no yoke was placed, limiting the prohibited work or the disqualifying work to yoke. Whereas the Eglah Rufa Torah says, Asher lo yu'bad ba, no work was done with it, broadening it to work beyond just the yoke. Now, can we take that expansive definition from paraduma, from Eglah Rufa, that the disqualification of work is not simply limited to yoke, but any work? Can we take that and apply it to paraduma? Right? Now, how did we do that? We did that via a GEZEIRA SHAVA, not a KAL. There's no KAL here because it itself is already more lenient. Oh, wait, because there's no KAL because it itself is more lenient. Or it itself is more strict because of the age restriction.
I thought it was because the word "it" was already tied up and used for something else.
Okay, that's why it transcends the GEZEIRA SHAVA. That's why the GEZEIRA SHAVA is being blocked. That's where we're going now. Right, that's where we're about to go now. That's correct.
Not for the
KAL, right? Because that's right. So that's why I said, even though we're not using the KAL anymore, it's important to remember it because we're going to come back to it. Right. So at the moment, what we come to is we have a GEZEIRA SHAVA. Right. The GEZEIRA SHAVA is the verse says, yeah.
Can you just give the reason why the KAL doesn't work the other way from Eglah Rufa?
Well, play it out. How would it play out? Your KAL, well, right. What you're trying to, okay, I'll explain to you why. I'll explain to you why.
Because the word
it. But that's what stops the paraduma doing a KAL to Eglah Rufa, not the other way.
Right, but there was a reason why. Because they both have the word it.
Well, okay, one second. You're asking why there's no kal vachomer going from egla rufa toward paraduma, right? Okay, it has nothing to do with that. Has nothing to do with the word it.
Oh, it doesn't.
No, that's because there is no kal vachomer. Because kal vachomer implies, like, the premise of kal vachomer is that one side is stringent and one side is lenient.
Okay.
The stringent side has a leniency that we're trying to transfer the other way, right? Because if the stringent one has a leniency, then certainly the lenient one has a leniency,
Right.
right? But in the case of egla rufa, it's just two stringencies. It's two stringencies.
Oh, it's two stringencies.
It's a stringency of
There's no
age being a
leniency.
factor and stringency of work beyond yoke being a factor. So how would that help you transfer to paraduma?
Okay.
Right? You have no how much. You have no how much of the morse though.
I don't know why.
So you have to have a GEZEIRA SHAVA going that way. The other way you can do it, because look, paraduma is lenient because age is not a factor, and yet it has the stringency of blemish. So egla rufa, which has the stringency of age, so it's more stringent than paraduma, can then absorb the stringency from paraduma that says blemish is an issue. That was prevented by the word ba, it. Right? But now, to go the other way, to go from egla rufa toward paraduma, there is no kal vachomer, but we do have a GEZEIRA SHAVA. With me?
Yeah.
Isaac, with me or not so much?
Yeah.
Yeah. The main thing is we have a GEZEIRA SHAVA now, which is much more powerful than a kal vachomer. And the GEZEIRA SHAVA is like this. The Torah says yoke with respect to egla rufa, because when it comes to the prohibition of work or the disqualification of work for the egla rufa, the Torah says two things: upon which no work was done in it, and which was never drawn by a yoke. Two statements the Torah said by egla rufa. By paraduma, it says upon which no yoke was placed. So both have the word yoke. We have a tradition that there's a GEZEIRA SHAVA here on this word yoke, and therefore we can start transferring laws between each other. So what do? We take the law of expanding the definition of work to beyond yoke from egla rufa and transfer it to paraduma. And the Gemara asked yesterday, well, why not take the disqualification of blemish from paraduma and use that same GEZEIRA SHAVA to transfer it bilaterally the other way, that blemish is its qualifying factor in egla rufa? Well, why not? Right? To which the Gemara said, well, no, you can't go from paraduma to egla rufa, even with the GEZEIRA SHAVA, because you have the word ba. Torah says no blemish in it, to the exclusion of egla rufa. And that prevents the GEZEIRA SHAVA. To which the Gemara says, well, hey, the other GEZEIRA SHAVA, which you went that way, you took egla rufa's definition of work to beyond yoke and applied it to the paraduma. It also says the word it there. No work in it. So why is it that from egla rufa toward paraduma, we ignore the word it and we allow the transfer? And when it comes from paraduma toward egla rufa, we say it stops us. So what we're about to do now is to look at the word it by egla rufa and see how it's already tied up. Okay? And because it's tied up, therefore, it's not free to prevent the GEZEIRA SHAVA. Clear?
Right. So can transfer.
And if we can transfer from egla rufa to paraduma, but not from paraduma to egla rufa, because from paraduma to egla rufa, the word ba stops us, but from egla rufa toward para, the ba does not stop us because the ba is already preoccupied teaching us something else. In Gemara parlance, it's called mufna. Mufna means freed. Mufna means freed. So the word is mufna. The word is freed or available, or it's not available. In this case, it's not available considering it's teaching us other things. So that's where we are at the moment. So it's about the middle of the page, maybe a little bit above the middle, and the line starts the word hahu miboyale. Hahu, that's the opening word of the line. See it? Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Hahu, that word, ba, stated with regard to the egla rufa, miboyale is already required to teach us something else, and therefore not available to prevent the transfer of law, the GEZEIRA SHAVA, from egla to paradum. What's it being used for? Lamute kachim, to exclude. Kachim means holy. It's a broad term to describe animals that have been dedicated for karbanis, for offerings, lemute kachim deloi postlebu avoda, to exclude kachim from the disqualification of work. So the Torah says, by egla rufa, no work was done with it, with it to the exclusion of other karbanos. And because it's already been used to exclude other karbanos, it's not going to exclude paraduma, and the transfer can happen. Yeah? Yeah, you clear?
Yeah.
Robert, with me?
Yeah. Repeat that again.
The word ba in egla rufa, it says, no work was done with it. That's the word ba, with it. Yeah. So that word teaches us that the disqualification of work is for egla rufa and not for karbanis, which means an animal which you used once to plow your field can become a carbon.
Oh,
The disqualification of work is not applied to karbanis. And that's taught to us by the word it. And therefore, because that word it is preoccupied, excluding karbanis from the disqualification of work, therefore the disqualification of work can be transferred to paraduma. And the word ba doesn't prevent it, because the word ba is busy doing something else, namely telling us that karbanis are not under the disqualification of work.
egla rufa is distinct from karbanis.
That's it.
Sense.
Correct.
It's to teach us that karbanis
Are not disqualified if they did work.
disqualified their work.
Correct. Now the question is, why would I think they would be disqualified from work? Why would I think so to begin with? Why do I need a prevention?
Why do you need this law?
That's right.
Or this word to teach us?
That's correct. And now you have a two-word phrase that's also important to know. Salka daitach. Salka daitach literally means, salka means like go up, daitach in your mind, which means it would have gone up in your mind. Amina, to say.
Lest you say, that kind of phrase.
That kind of phrase, yes. So salka daitach is a common phrase that you would hear in Gemara parlance.
Seen that a lot, English translation.
I guess you could say, lest you say, yeah. Should you say, or you might have suggested.
I think,
Yeah. That's right. So oftentimes it'll be something like, Maika Sokataitach, what were you thinking? Like when you ask the question, what were you thinking? Or Mikara Mike, well, okay, that's Maika Savar, it's a different thing. But obviously, Sokataitach is a common phrase. Solka, which means salik, like to go up. Like histalkus, like someone passes away, it's called histalkut, like it goes up. Salka goes up, taitach in your mind. So,
I say that word?
daitach,
Daitach.
like that, but daitach, your thought, your mind. That's right. Salka daitach. So this is a common phrase, which is like, what was the salka daitach? What was the salka daitach? Or you put the word ka, which is like the thinking, which is a phrase to be like, okay, what was the thinking before we had this thing? Which will help us understand what that thing is, right? By understanding what we were thinking to begin with. Okay, so what would I have thought had I not had the word ba? Or in other words, why do I need to exclude karbanis from the disqualification of work? Why would I have thought that it would be disqualified by work, that I require the word ba to disqualify it, to prevent us from thinking that? Yeah? So says the Gemara, I might have thought the following. I could use a kavachomer. I would have used a kavachomer. So I am using the word ba to prevent the kavachomer by egla rufa, but not to prevent the kavachomer from paraduma, because there is none, but to prevent the kavachomer that I would have made to other karbanis. How would I made sorry? From egla rufa. How would I have made a kavachomer from egla rufa to other karbanis? As following.
Because egla rufa is not a korban. It's not.
But where's the lenient factor that would transfer to the more strict factor? No, we had it already. What's lenient? Where's the lenient element in something that doesn't disqualify it? No, something that doesn't disqualify egla rufa, but does disqualify karbanis, making the karbanis more strict. No?
The
blemish. Here we go. So let's see. We would have made a kavachomer from egla. Ma egla she'ein mum paisaba. Looking at the egla rufa, where a blemish does not disqualify it, and yet, even though it has that leniency where it could be blemished, avoida, if you did work, paiselas, it does ruin it. Paiselas
How much
Ba.
more so?
Kachim, how much more so? Shemum Paiselas Behen.
Doesn't have-
Where does this get
Cannot.
disqualified by blemish? Ein adin, is it not therefore logical? Shavoida Paiselas Behen, that work should disqualify it. So because of that kavachimer that I might have concluded, comes to Torah and says, "Bah, the blemish, the disqualification of work is limited to aglarufa and not to be expanded to karbanis." And therefore, because the word "bah" is preoccupied doing that, therefore the expansion of definition of work could be transferred to paraduma to go beyond yoke.
So, yeah.
All right, but we're not done. We still have another 8 or so lines on that. We're not done. But ikal mifrach, one could counter argue. The line begins with the word mifrach, le mifrach. Ikal mifrach, one could counter argue. I don't need the word ba to prevent that kal v'chomer. I would have logically reasoned my way out of that kal v'chomer without the word ba. How would I do so? Because ikal mifrach, one can counter argue. Mala agla, but when you look at the egla, shekain shanim paiselas ba, it has another stringency. The other stringency is the age factor. So we were looking at a leniency and saying, hey, look, egla is lenient. How do I know it's lenient? Because the blemish is not a disqualifying factor. And yet, work is. To which the Gemara says, well, hold on a second. Egla roof is not across the board more lenient than karbanis. It has another element that's stringent that would justify the other stringency of no work. What's that stringency? Shekain shonim paiselas ba. Sorry, egla rufa has another stringency in that age is a factor. Atu kachim, but when we look at karbanis, mileka, is there not the possible shonim?
Well, there's some that you have to have.
That's the Gemara's response.
The ram, no.
That's the Gemara's response. In other words, first the Gemara said the word ba is preventing a transference of the law of work, of the disqualification of work to karbanis. To which right, and why is that? Because I would have thought that, hey, there's how much more so here? Because egla rufa is more lenient, considering that blemish is not an issue. But the Gemara says, is it more lenient? Age is a factor. As a whole, it's not more lenient.
Because it has the stringency of the age.
Because it has the stringency of the age. And therefore, it's not as if universally it's lenient, with the exception of this stringency. And therefore, you can transfer the stringency to something that to begin with is more stringent. It's not universally more stringent. It has the age factor. And when it comes to karbanis, there is an issue of age and some there isn't an issue in age. So you can't just do a kal v'chomer that way. Right? So what's the Gemara's response? You already thought of it, but what do you want to say? Sorry.
When you bring karbanis, some do have to have the stringency of having.
But that's correct. So initially the Gemara's kal v'chomer was for all karbanis. Now the Gemara is saying, no, the kal v'chomer would have been only to those. Which would mean, if we were to follow that kal v'chomer, then a carbon which is not restricted by age is allowed to have been worked on, and a carbon that is restricted by age could not do work because of kal v'chomer, and that's the kal v'chomer we're preventing by the word ba. Yeah,
that's the counter.
That's the Gemara says. Ki yitzrich. When would I have followed that? Yeah. So Gemara therefore says, Ki yitzrich. When would I have needed the kal v'chomer? When would I have needed kra, the verse, to prevent the kal v'chomer? Lahanach kachim, to those karbanis, the possible shonim, where age is a factor. Okay. Now the Gemara. So where were we at this point?
So then, are we concluding then that the word ba for egla rufa is still free?
No, it's not.
I mean, sorry, it's not free. So therefore, transference can still
Have to take place for paraduma.
Paraduma.
That's correct. But what's it being used for? For a hyper-specific issue, not for all karbanis, because not all karbanis could make a kal v'chomer. It's only for the select few kal v'chomer. That's right. Those select karbanis which age is a factor, and because age is a factor, so it shares that similarity with egla rufa. right? And Egla Rufa is yet more stringent because it's more lenient because a blemish is not an issue, and yet work is an issue. So when it comes to carbonis that share the age factor, have the stringency that blemish is an issue. How much more so it should have the stringency that work is an issue. So comes the word ba and says, no. Don't transfer that stringency of work to those carbonis that are equal to carbonis, that are equal to egla, in that they age is a factor.
Then
Don't make the transfer. The word ba tells us to prevent the KAL, and thus that word ba is tied up already, and therefore we are free now to use the GEZEIRA SHAVA and take the expanded definition of work and transfer it to paraduma.
So if that KAL was to be utilized,
If the KAL would be utilized, what would be the law? Yeah, go through it. This is the Salkadaitach, yeah? This is what we would have thought.
if the KAL was to be utilized,
Yes.
then does that mean the word ba would not be tied up?
Would not be tied up, and it would prevent us from taking.
That means it would be used to block the transference of using the GEZEIRA SHAVA.
That's correct.
The paraduma.
That's correct. If it wasn't tied up and we were actually making use of the KAL,
If we were making use of KAL,
that's why I'm saying that in the context of the Gemara here, GEZEIRA SHAVA is more powerful than KAL. Why is that? Because you have the word ba associated with a word, with a law. Let's just say the law is that Egla Rufa is disqualified if there was work, right? That's the law about which the Torah says ba. Now I have two directions I can go with that same law. I can take it and move it to carbonis through KAL, or I can take it and move it to paraduma with KAL. And which one do I use the word to ba to prevent? I use it to prevent the KAL rather than the GEZEIRA SHAVA. Why? So presumably, even though the word ba in theory could block GEZEIRA SHAVA, but if I have the choice as to which one it should block, it's going to block KAL, not the word GEZEIRA SHAVA. Because to begin with, that's why I'm saying in the context of the Gemara here, it would seem that KAL is a weaker argument, and it follows because KAL to begin with is a logical deduction.
Right.
It's not a super rational, divinely imposed derivation.
Right.
It's a logical derivation.
Right.
And if the wording itself tells you, hey, don't apply that logic, then don't apply the logic. Right? But if Hashem comes along and says, well, I wrote the text, I put the words, and I'm telling you there's a transference here. That's what GEZEIRA SHAVA is. It's not a logical deduction. It's Hashem saying there's a transference. Okay, so if Hashem also puts a word to prevent that transference, okay, so I got to prevent the transference. Right? But if Hashem does not put that word to prevent the transference, you can't logically reason your way out of that transference. When it comes to KAL, because to begin with it's a logical deduction, I can logically reason my way out of the deduction. And therefore, if I have a word ba in it, and it's got to prevent something, then use it rationally to prevent the rational derivation, rather than use it rationally to prevent the super rational derivation. That's why I'm saying that I think GEZEIRA SHAVA, from this Gemara at least, again, we have to know all of Shas to make this kind of statement across the board, but at least from the Gemara here, it would seem that GEZEIRA SHAVA is more powerful than KAL.
Yeah, it seems so.
That's right. Even though the word ba could prevent a GEZEIRA SHAVA when it has nothing else to prevent. When it has nothing else to prevent. Because if it can choose between preventing a KAL or GEZEIRA SHAVA, I'm going to prevent the KAL rather than the GEZEIRA SHAVA. Right? As we're doing here, where we're preventing the KAL to kachim and allowing the GEZEIRA SHAVA to take place to paraduma. Yeah.
KAL also go back to Sinai?
Yes, but KAL doesn't go back to tradition.
Doesn't?
No, it's just a tool we're given. Apply KAL as you see fit.
As you see fit.
Yes.
You don't have to find it
based on tradition. No, no. GEZEIRA SHAVA, you have to have a tradition. Is there GEZEIRA SHAVA here? That's why I'm saying GEZEIRA SHAVA is much more powerful. Because to begin with, it's a super rational derivation, which Hashem says, here it is. When it comes to KAL, it's a tool Hashem gave. Same thing with, there are other ones also like that. For example, I think Binyan Av is also like this.
But that wasn't raised as an argument. Did any of the sages argue? Well, we have a GEZEIRA SHAVA here.
That's the premise of the whole discussion.
We should employ this, or is it?
It's not stated, but it's implicit.
But it's implicit.
Whenever there's a word GEZEIRA SHAVA, that's implied.
Okay.
Because that's right. The Gemara is doing that. The Gemara is saying, well, you have a GEZEIRA SHAVA here, so why aren't you going both ways? Sorry?
person studying Gemara, it's not so understood. I would have, the same, I have my own.
That's the training, right?
That's the thing.
That's why they sent me to yeshiva for 10 years. I'm kidding.
Right.
Yeah.
It's too.
But it's implied. It's implied in the rules. And the truth is, I imagine that. I mean, I know Rashi discusses it elsewhere, and I imagine that Rashi would discuss it earlier in the Gemara when it comes up first. They would discuss it, and then like now you're expected to remember it throughout the rest.
Right. Like
Right?
Rambam does that too in some of the chapters.
Very much so. Oh yeah, he like lays down principles, and then
at the beginning he expects you to know what they
you remember that. That's right.
later down.
Tanya does a similar thing. The first couple of chapters defines all the terms, and then expects you to remember it throughout the book. That's right. See back earlier. I was going to say something else, which is what we seen before. I was going to say something else.
I don't know exactly.
I was going to make a comment about GEZEIRA, SHAVA, and KAL.
Sorry if I interrupted.
No, it's okay. I don't remember. So that's not that important. Oh, I was going to say like this. I think there are other principles that are also like that. Of the 13, some of them are logical and thus can be counter-argued, and others are tradition. KAL is certainly a logical one, as per the Gemara's usage or even disposal. The Gemara will like apply KAL and then go through 5 or 6 pages back and forth. But this side has leniency. But that side has a stringency. That side has a stringency. They go back and forth till it concludes either yay KAL or no KAL. And sometimes the Gemara will introduce a third law and be like, well, this one shares a stringency with that one, but a leniency with that one. But the commonality between all of them is that they all share this stringency, and yet they also have, and then expand it to like KAL logic by 2-3 laws interjecting with each other. Yeah. But when it comes to, I think Binyan Av is also like this. Binyan Av means to set down a premise. So if the Torah in a certain instance defines a certain idea in a certain way, then that becomes like Binyan Av means literally to create a father. Meaning it becomes create a principle. That's right. It becomes now a principle. Then whenever you see that thing, it includes that definition. An axiom, yeah. Av means a father, or an axiom is a good word. So it's Binyan Av, we're creating an axiom. So that's a good word. So if the Torah defines something, that becomes an axiom that by which you will use that same definition every time that other thing is associated.
Reason it's a given.
That's right. That's right.
It's a reference point that you can build on.
So consider what you just described about Rambam.
Right. That's
like a Binyan Av. Like he lays down a principle, now go figure it out. Yeah. So that's the way to the best of my knowledge, I think that's also a logical one. Because it's quite rational that a book would do that. A book would define terms, and now whenever I use that term, go back to that definition. Right? So there are other ones that are kind of logical like that as well. But GEZEIRA SHAVA is like the most super rational.
Most authoritative.
Authoritative in that sense. That's right, because it goes straight tradition. This is it is.
Right.
The other ones also are somewhat logical, like KAL Prat. You have a general term, specific term, then that means you have to limit the general term to the specific term in some manner. Right? So that's rational. That's right. And that's rational. It follows. You have a text that states a general term, and then a specific term, it means you must be somehow limiting the general term to the specific in some way. Right? So that's also a lot rational reasoning. But GEZEIRA SHAVA is not. And that's my assumption as to why the Gemara here uses the word ba to prevent the KAL going to Karbonis rather than prevent a GEZEIRA SHAVA going to Paraduma. Because it could have chosen neither, in theory. Okay. Tomorrow we're going to go further in this line of reasoning. And what the Gemara is going to do is tomorrow is tell us like this. To begin with, we don't need the word ba to prevent us from thinking that work is a disqualifying factor from Karbonis. There's another verse which teaches us that. And if there's another verse that teaches us that, then the word ba is free to prevent the GEZEIRA SHAVA to Paraduma. That's what the Gemara is going to counter tomorrow. And we're going to get more and more hyper-specific to which Karbonis we might have made a mistake in KAL and which one it's preventing. Okay, wonderful day, Eden.